She asked for a piano. The billionaire CEO sent a subpoena. The jury made him pledge $1.1 billion for their child's future. All I asked for was a piano, Allegra Wynford said softly, her voice barely carrying across the hushed courtroom. A simple upright piano so our child could grow up with music. She stood in a modest blue dress, sheet music clutched in one hand. Across the room, Cassian Rourke sat in a custom Italian suit worth more than her car, his expression carved from stone. And in response, she continued, her voice gaining strength, he sent a legal team to my door with a subpoena. He accused me of financial coercion. He dragged my name through headlines while I was fighting to keep our baby healthy through the stress. A juror wiped away a tear as Allegra placed a small toy keyboard on the evidence table. This is what I've been able to afford. This is what I play for our child each night. Her fingers moved across the plastic keys, producing a haunting melody that filled the courtroom. Music isn't about money to me. It's about soul. It's about giving our child the same opportunity that changed my life. Cassian shifted in his seat, his confident facade cracking for the first time as the simple melody continued. For a brief moment, the billionaire venture capitalist looked lost. A man who had invested in everything except what truly mattered. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Rourke, you've claimed Ms. Wynford is attempting to exploit your wealth. Yet her original request was for a piano that costs less than your watch. Can you explain this disparity? Cassian's mouth opened, but no words came out. And in that silence, everything changed. This is the story of how a quiet request became a legal battle that stunned the nation. Of how a woman who spoke through music found her voice in a courtroom. And of how a jury made a billionaire pledge $1.1 billion to the future of a child he'd never met. All because he couldn't understand that some things in life can't be measured in dollars and cents. Allegra Wynford grew up in a small yellow house on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia, where magnolia trees cast dappled shadows across the porch and humidity hung in the air like a promise. The house wasn't much. Peeling paint, creaky floorboards, windows that rattled when storms blew in from the coast. But it was filled with something more valuable than luxury. Music that flowed through every room like oxygen. Her mother, Elaine, worked double shifts as a nurse at Savannah Memorial, her scrubs always smelling faintly of antiseptic and compassion. Her father, James, repaired instruments in their converted basement, his hands perpetually stained with wood polish and varnish. They didn't have much in terms of material wealth, but they gave Allegra something money couldn't buy, the understanding that talent and passion mattered more than circumstance. Music isn't just notes on a page, alley girl, her father would say, guiding her small fingers across piano keys. It's what happens in the spaces between the notes. That's where the soul lives. Allegra showed her gift early, not in dramatic prodigy fashion, but in quiet moments that made adults stop mid-conversation. At 4, she could replicate melodies after hearing them once. At 6, she began composing simple pieces that carried emotional depth beyond her years. By 8, her father couldn't teach her anymore. Her talent had surpassed his knowledge. She doesn't just play. Her first professional teacher told Elaine and James after Allegra's initial lesson. She translates emotion into sound. That's something you can't teach. The Wynfords scraped together money for lessons, sacrificing new clothes and family vacations. Elaine picked up extra hospital shifts. James took on repair jobs from neighboring counties. Their investment wasn't about creating a prodigy or living vicariously through their daughter. It was about nurturing the rare gift they recognized in her. Allegra's childhood unfolded in a delicate balance between ordinary life and extraordinary talent. She attended public school, made friends, skinned her knees on the playground like any other child. But after school, while her friends watched television or played video games, she sat at the family's upright piano, a restored Baldwin her father had salvaged and lovingly rebuilt, and disappeared into a world of her own creation. That piano was my first real friend, Allegra would later tell an interviewer. It never judged, never demanded, never expected. It just received whatever I gave it and transformed it into something beautiful. At 12, Allegra performed at a local community center. The audience was small, mostly neighbors, church members, and her parents' friends. But among them sat Dr. Eleanor Harmon, a retired music professor from Savannah College of Art and Design, who had come at a colleague's insistence. "I've heard of many talented children in my 40 years of teaching," Dr. Harmon told the Wynfords afterward, her eyes bright with excitement. "But I've never heard anyone play with such natural emotional intelligence. Your daughter doesn't just understand music. She understands the human heart." Dr. Harmon offered to teach Allegra privately, waiving her usual fee. Those lessons, held in the professor's book-lined living room with its grand piano and walls of vinyl records, opened new worlds. Eleanor introduced Allegra to classical compositions, jazz improvisation, music theory, and composition techniques. But most importantly, she taught her that music was a language, one that could speak truths words couldn't express. "You have a rare gift, Allegra," Eleanor told her one afternoon as rain pattered against the windows. "You can make people feel understood when you play. Never underestimate the power of that connection." At 15, Allegra was accepted into Georgia State Arts Academy on full scholarship. The decision to let her go wasn't easy for her parents. The academy was 3 hours away, requiring Allegra to live in dormitories during the week, returning home only on weekends. The night before she left, Allegra found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, quietly crying over a cup of cold tea. "I don't have to go, Mom," Allegra said, sliding into the chair beside her. "I can stay and apply again next year." Elaine wiped her eyes and took her daughter's hands that were becoming more graceful and skilled with each passing year. "No, sweetheart, this is your path. Sometimes love means letting go a little so someone can become who they're meant to be." Those words would echo through Allegra's life in ways her mother could never have anticipated. At the academy, Allegra flourished. Her technique sharpened, her repertoire expanded, and her original compositions began attracting attention beyond the school. At 17, she won a regional competition with a piece she'd written about her grandmother's battle with Alzheimer's, a composition that moved the judges to tears with its delicate balance of sorrow and dignity. "Music is how I process the world," Allegra explained when asked about her composition process. "I haven't decided to write about something. I feel it, and the music is already there, waiting to be transcribed." By 19, Allegra was performing small concerts around Georgia and neighboring states. She wasn't famous. Her style was too introspective, too nuanced for mainstream popularity. But she was building a devoted following among people who understood that music could be a form of emotional truth-telling. After graduating from the academy, Allegra enrolled at Juilliard on scholarship, moving to New York with little more than her clothes, a few cherished books, and the quiet confidence her parents had instilled in her. The city was overwhelming at first, its pace, noise, and relentless ambition so different from Savannah's languid rhythms. But Allegra adapted, finding sanctuary in practice rooms and small performance spaces where her music could breathe. "New York taught me that there are many ways to be successful," she later reflected. "Some musicians chase fame and fortune. I just wanted to create moments of genuine connection, to translate emotions that people struggle to express." By 23, Allegra had established herself as a respected performer and composer in certain circles. She wasn't wealthy. She supplemented her income by teaching piano to children and accompanying other musicians. But she was building a career on her own terms, creating music that mattered to her. She had no way of knowing that her life was about to intersect with someone whose understanding of success, power, and control existed in a completely different universe from her own. Someone whose wealth could open doors she'd never imagined, but whose emotional poverty would eventually threaten everything she valued most. Someone named Cassian Rourke. While Allegra Wynford was growing up in a modest Savannah home filled with music, Cassian Rourke was being shaped by a very different environment. Born into the upper echelons of Manhattan society, his childhood unfolded in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, where success was measured in acquisitions and emotions were treated as inefficient distractions. Lawrence Rourke, Cassian's father, had built Rourke Ventures from a small investment firm into a powerhouse that shaped industries. A self-made man with a ruthless business acumen, Lawrence approached parenting the same way he approached corporate takeovers, with strategic planning, high expectations, and little room for sentiment. "The world doesn't reward feelings, son," Lawrence told Cassian repeatedly. "It rewards results." Cassian's mother, Victoria, came from old money and older traditions. Elegant, poised, and emotionally distant, she viewed her role as preparing her son for the social responsibilities that accompanied wealth. Warmth was replaced by etiquette, affection by appropriate appearances. "Reputation is currency, darling," she would say, straightening Cassian's tie before social functions. "Never forget that people are always watching." The Rourke household operated with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. Meals were served at exact times. Schedules were maintained with military discipline. Even leisure activities were selected for their strategic value. Tennis for networking, sailing for building character, piano lessons not for joy but because cultural refinement was expected in their social circle. Unlike Allegra, whose musical gift was nurtured with love, Cassian's piano lessons were exercises in perfection and discipline. His teacher, a stern Russian woman who had once performed at Carnegie Hall, rapped his knuckles when he made mistakes and timed his practice sessions with a stopwatch. "You play with technical precision but no soul," she told him after a particularly flawless but emotionless recital. "Music requires vulnerability, Cassian, something you seem determined to avoid." At 12, Cassian was sent to Westfield Academy, an exclusive boarding school that had educated generations of future CEOs, politicians, and power brokers. There, he learned that emotional detachment wasn't just a family trait but a valuable skill in a world where connections were currency and weakness was exploited. Cassian excelled academically, captained the debate team, and graduated as valedictorian. His speech, praised by faculty for its eloquence, spoke of ambition and excellence but never once mentioned happiness or fulfillment, concepts that had no measurable metrics in his worldview. At Princeton, Cassian double-majored in economics and computer science, laying the groundwork for what would become his signature approach to venture capital, a data-driven methodology that identified patterns human intuition might miss. While other students explored identity and built friendships, Cassian built algorithms and investment strategies. "Rourke doesn't have friends," a classmate once observed. "He has strategic alliances." By 25, Cassian had founded his own venture capital firm with seed money from his father, a loan he repaid within 18 months with interest. Rourke Capital quickly gained a reputation for identifying promising startups before competitors recognized their potential. His analytical approach, combined with an almost preternatural ability to predict market shifts, made him both admired and feared in financial circles. "Cassian doesn't just see the chessboard," a business journalist wrote. "He sees 3 moves ahead on boards other players don't even know exist." His personal style reflected his business philosophy: precise, controlled, and impeccable. Custom suits from Italian tailors. Watches that cost more than most cars. A minimalist penthouse designed by a renowned architect, featuring original artwork selected not for emotional resonance, but for investment value. Relationships followed the same pattern. Cassian dated strategically beautiful, accomplished women who enhanced his image and demanded little emotional vulnerability. These relationships lasted exactly as long as they served their purpose, ending with the same efficiency with which they began. "He's not cold," explained a former girlfriend, a successful gallery owner. "He's calculated. There's a difference. Cold implies absence of feeling. Cassian feels deeply. He just subjects those feelings to cost-benefit analysis before acting on them." By 32, Cassian had built Rourke Capital into a billion-dollar enterprise with investments spanning technology, healthcare, renewable energy, and real estate. His name appeared regularly on lists of most eligible bachelors, most influential business leaders, and most feared negotiators. Yet for all his success, something essential remained undeveloped in Cassian: the ability to recognize value beyond balance sheets, to connect without calculating advantage, to be present without planning exit strategies. The problem with Rourke, A business rival once observed, "Isn't that he's ruthless? Many successful people are. It's that he's never found anything he values more than winning. And that makes him dangerous to competitors, to partners, and probably to himself." This assessment wasn't entirely accurate. Cassian did value something beyond victory. Control. Control over outcomes, over environments, over narratives. The one thing he couldn't control: the emotional currents that occasionally surged beneath his carefully constructed exterior. He regarded as a design flaw to be managed rather than a fundamental aspect of human experience. This was the man who would encounter Allegra Wynford at a private charity event in the spring of her 23rd year. A man whose wealth could open any door but whose emotional architecture had no room for the kind of vulnerability her music demanded. Their worlds couldn't have been more different. Allegra, raised to believe that feelings were meant to be expressed, that connection mattered more than perfection, that music was a language of the heart. Cassian, trained to view emotions as inefficiencies, relationships as transactions, and art as investment vehicles. Yet something would happen when these opposing forces collided, something neither of them could have anticipated, something that would ultimately change both their lives in ways no algorithm could have predicted. For Cassian Rourke was about to encounter the one thing his wealth couldn't control, his analysis couldn't quantify, and his defenses couldn't withstand. Music that spoke directly to the parts of himself he had spent a lifetime denying existed. The Bergman Foundation's annual gala was among New York's most exclusive charity events. A carefully orchestrated evening where the ultra-wealthy performed philanthropy under crystal chandeliers. For the privileged few hundred who received invitations, it was as much about being seen as about the causes supported. Cassian Rourke attended every year, not from charitable impulse but because the event provided unparalleled networking opportunities. The foundation's focus on arts education aligned with several of his investment portfolios, and the guest list included decision-makers he might otherwise struggle to access. This particular year, however, the gala's entertainment had been disrupted by a last-minute cancellation. The internationally renowned pianist originally scheduled had withdrawn due to illness, leaving the organizers scrambling for a replacement. "We've found someone," explained Eleanor Bergman, the foundation's elderly director, when Cassian inquired about the change. "A young woman from Juilliard. Not famous, but extraordinarily talented. My nephew heard her at a small venue and was quite moved." Cassian nodded politely, unconcerned. The entertainment was background noise to the real purpose of the evening: strategic conversations and relationship maintenance with key financial players. The gala unfolded predictably. Exquisite food served by white-gloved staff. Champagne in crystal flutes. Conversations about market trends, real estate values, and tax strategies thinly disguised as social pleasantries. Cassian moved through the room with practiced ease, shaking hands, making mental notes of useful information, calculating potential opportunities. When the lights dimmed slightly to signal the evening's musical interlude, Cassian took a seat at his assigned table, preparing to endure what he assumed would be pleasant but forgettable background music. He checked his watch discreetly, 20 minutes allocated for the performance, then the real business of the evening would resume. A young woman walked onto the small stage. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but not designer, her dark hair pulled back in a classic style that emphasized her delicate features. No jewelry except small pearl earrings. No dramatic entrance or acknowledgement of the prestigious audience. She simply sat at the grand piano, took a moment to center herself, and began to play. The first notes silenced the room. Cassian, who had been mentally reviewing talking points for his next conversation, found his attention unexpectedly captured. The piece wasn't recognizable to him, not from the classical repertoire he'd been forced to study as a child. It seemed to be an original composition, one that began with a gentle questioning phrase that evolved into something more complex and emotionally nuanced. Around him, conversations stilled. Phones disappeared. The usual restless energy of wealthy people accustomed to constant stimulation settled into something approaching reverence. Allegra played with closed eyes, her body swaying slightly with the music, completely absorbed in the emotional landscape she was creating. The composition moved through moments of questioning uncertainty into passages of surprising strength, then resolved into a delicate, haunting conclusion that seemed to ask questions no one in the room had thought to consider. When the final note faded, there was a moment of complete silence, a rarity in a room full of people accustomed to filling every pause with their own importance. Then applause erupted, genuine and enthusiastic rather than the polite acknowledgement usually offered to gala entertainment. Cassian found himself applauding as well, though he couldn't have explained why. Something in the music had bypassed his analytical mind and reached places he generally kept carefully guarded. It was unsettling. Allegra acknowledged the applause with a modest nod, then began her second piece, this one more technically complex but equally emotionally resonant. As she played, Cassian found himself studying her face, trying to understand the source of the strange effect her music was having on him. There was no artifice in her performance, no calculated attempt to impress or manipulate the audience's response. She played as if alone in a practice room, completely authentic in her expression. This quality, this unguarded emotional honesty, was so foreign to the environment of strategic social positioning that it created a kind of cognitive dissonance. When the performance concluded, Allegra received a standing ovation. She seemed almost surprised by the response, offering a shy smile before leaving the stage. The room immediately filled with conversation again, but Cassian remained seated, uncharacteristically distracted from his networking agenda. Remarkable talent, isn't she? Eleanor Bergman had appeared beside his table, her eyes twinkling with satisfaction at the audience's response. Yes, Cassian agreed, regaining his composure. Quite impressive. Her own composition. Indeed. She writes most of what she performs. Allegra Wynford is her name. Remember it, you'll be hearing it more in the future. Eleanor moved on to greet other guests, leaving Cassian with an unfamiliar impulse, the desire to learn more about this musician whose work had momentarily penetrated his carefully constructed defenses. Later that evening, as the gala was winding down, Cassian spotted Allegra near the exit, speaking with the event coordinator. She had changed from her performance dress into simpler attire, a modest blouse and skirt that stood in stark contrast to the designer fashion surrounding her. She was preparing to leave, gathering sheet music into a worn leather portfolio. Making a decision that felt uncharacteristically impulsive, Cassian approached her. Ms. Wynford, he said, extending his hand. Cassian Rourke, your performance was extraordinary. Allegra looked up, momentarily surprised by the attention from someone whose face regularly appeared in financial publications. Thank you, Mr. Rourke. That's kind of you to say. Not kind. Accurate. Cassian found himself speaking with unusual directness. Your composition communicated something authentic, rare in these circles. A small smile touched her lips. I'll take that as a compliment, though I'm not sure what it says about these circles. The subtle challenge in her response caught him off guard. People didn't generally speak to Cassian Rourke with anything but deference, especially not unknown musicians at charity events. It was absolutely intended as a compliment, he clarified. I have some involvement with arts funding through my foundation. I'd be interested in discussing potential support for your work. It was a standard approach for him, framing personal interest in professional terms, maintaining control of the interaction through the implicit power dynamic of patron and artist. Allegra considered him for a moment, her expression thoughtful rather than immediately grateful. That's generous, though I should be clear that my work isn't commercially oriented. I'm not looking to maximize market appeal. That's precisely what makes it valuable, Cassian replied, surprised by his own response. Authenticity is increasingly rare. It deserves support. They spoke for several minutes about her background and current projects. Cassian found himself genuinely listening rather than simply extracting useful information, another departure from his usual approach to conversations. I'm documenting community music programs in underserved areas, Allegra explained when he asked about her current focus. Creating compositions inspired by their stories, then performing benefit concerts to raise funds for instruments and instruction. An admirable project, Cassian said, already calculating how such an initiative might enhance his foundation's public profile, but likely difficult to scale without significant backing. Scale isn't always the goal, Mr. Rourke, Allegra replied. Depth of impact matters more than breadth sometimes. One child finding their voice through music can create ripples we can't measure. The comment challenged his fundamental business philosophy, where scalability was essential to value. Yet he found himself intrigued rather than dismissive. Perhaps we could continue this conversation in a less hectic environment, he suggested. I have some thoughts on how your work might be supported while maintaining its integrity. Allegra hesitated, clearly weighing the opportunity against some internal reservation. I'd be open to that, she said finally, though I should be clear that I maintain creative control over my projects. I wouldn't expect otherwise, Cassian assured her, though in truth, he was unaccustomed to accepting such conditions. Control was his default operating principle in all ventures. They exchanged contact information, Cassian handing her his private business card, Allegra writing her number on the back of a simple personal card that listed only her name and pianist/composer. 3 days later, they met at a small cafe near Lincoln Center, neutral territory rather than his office, a concession Cassian rarely made but which seemed appropriate in this case. He arrived to find Allegra already seated, reviewing sheet music, a cup of tea cooling beside her. Thank you for meeting me, he said, taking the seat across from her. I've been thinking about your community music project. Have you? Allegra looked genuinely surprised that a billionaire venture capitalist had given actual thought to her modest initiative. Yes, I believe there's potential for a more structured approach that would preserve the artistic integrity while creating sustainable impact. Cassian outlined a proposal. His foundation would fund a series of community concerts and workshops, professionally documented through recordings and film. Allegra would create original compositions based on the community's stories, perform them in prestigious venues to raise awareness, and help establish permanent music education programs in areas that lacked them. The documentation component is key, he explained. It creates a narrative that attracts additional donors, builds your professional profile, and provides measurable outcomes for the foundation's board. Allegra listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about implementation and expectations. And my creative independence would be maintained? Completely, Cassian assured her. The foundation would handle logistics, funding, and promotion. The artistic direction would be entirely yours. It was a generous offer, one that would provide resources beyond what Allegra could access independently while significantly raising her professional visibility. Yet she didn't immediately accept, which both surprised and intrigued Cassian. People didn't generally hesitate when he offered financial backing. May I ask why this project interests you specifically? Allegra asked, studying him with unexpected directness. There are many worthy arts initiatives seeking funding. The question caught Cassian off guard. The true answer, that her music had affected him in ways he didn't fully understand and couldn't entirely control, wasn't something he was prepared to articulate, even to himself. Your work has unusual emotional intelligence, he said instead. It creates genuine connection rather than mere appreciation. That's valuable in a cultural landscape increasingly dominated by algorithmic content and superficial engagement. It was a corporate answer, framing his interest in strategic terms rather than personal response. Yet Allegra seemed to hear something beneath the polished explanation. I appreciate your honesty, she said, though Cassian wasn't sure he had been entirely honest. I'd like to accept your offer, with one condition, which is that we maintain clear boundaries between the professional support and any personal dimension that might develop. I value my independence, artistic and otherwise. The condition revealed an awareness of dynamics Cassian hadn't expected her to anticipate. The way financial support could become a form of control, the potential complications of personal and professional entanglement. It suggested a wisdom beyond her years and experience. Absolutely, he agreed, though in truth, The possibility of personal involvement hadn't been his conscious intention. Professional boundaries will be respected. They shook hands across the table, finalizing an arrangement that would ultimately change both their lives in ways neither could have anticipated. For in establishing those clear boundaries, they had acknowledged the potential for something beyond a strictly professional relationship, a possibility that now hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniably present. As Cassian walked back to his office after their meeting, he found himself replaying their conversation, analyzing his unusual reactions to this young musician. Her directness, her quiet confidence, the way she valued artistic integrity over commercial potential. These qualities shouldn't have appealed to him. They contradicted his usual criteria for worthwhile associations. Yet something about Allegra Wynford had bypassed his careful filters. Perhaps it was her music, which spoke a language his analytical mind couldn't quite translate but which reached places he generally kept carefully guarded. Perhaps it was her authenticity in a world where strategic positioning was the norm. Whatever the cause, Cassian found himself looking forward to their next meeting with an anticipation that had nothing to do with business advantage. It was the beginning of a connection that would eventually force both of them to confront truths about themselves they had never intended to face. Truths that would ultimately lead to courtrooms and consequences neither could have imagined as they sat in that quiet cafe, planning a collaboration that seemed so straightforward on the surface. For Cassian Rourke, who had spent a lifetime investing in everything except emotional vulnerability, was about to encounter the one thing his wealth couldn't control and his analysis couldn't quantify: the unpredictable, unmanageable reality of genuine human connection. The collaboration between Allegra Wynford and Cassian Rourke's foundation began with remarkable success. The community music initiative launched in 3 underserved neighborhoods. One in the Bronx, one in Harlem, and one in Brooklyn. Allegra worked directly with local musicians, students, and families, immersing herself in their stories and traditions. From these experiences, she created a suite of compositions that captured the unique character of each community, while highlighting universal themes of resilience, connection, and hope. When performed at Lincoln Center with community members participating alongside professional musicians, the concert received standing ovations and critical acclaim. "Wynford has accomplished something rare," wrote a prominent music critic. "She has translated authentic community voices into sophisticated compositions without diminishing either. The result is music that bridges worlds without compromising integrity." The documentary film capturing the project's development attracted attention from arts organizations nationwide. Funding inquiries poured in. What had begun as a modest initiative was rapidly becoming a model for community-based arts programming. Throughout this professional success, Cassian maintained the boundaries Allegra had established. Their interactions remained focused on the project, their meetings primarily attended by foundation staff. Yet despite this professional framework, something was shifting between them, a growing awareness that transcended their formal roles. Cassian found himself attending every performance, watching from the back of the hall rather than claiming the prominent donor seats he was entitled to. He observed how Allegra interacted with community members, her genuine interest in their stories, her ability to make everyone from children to elders feel valued and heard. These qualities were foreign to his experience. In Cassian's world, interactions were strategic, relationships transactional. Allegra's authentic engagement with people regardless of their status or utility challenged his fundamental understanding of human connection. For her part, Allegra began to see dimensions of Cassian that contradicted his public persona. Behind the calculated businessman was someone with unexpected depth. A man who listened intently when she explained the emotional structure of a composition, who remembered details about the community members they worked with, who occasionally revealed flashes of vulnerability, quickly concealed behind professional poise. Their first step beyond strictly professional interaction came after the Lincoln Center performance. The foundation hosted a reception for donors and participants, a carefully orchestrated event where Cassian moved through the room with practiced charm, securing additional support for the program's expansion. As the evening wound down, he found Allegra on a terrace overlooking the plaza, away from the crowd. She stood quietly, still in her performance dress, watching the fountain. You should be inside celebrating, Cassian said, joining her at the railing. The performance was extraordinary. Thank you, Allegra replied. But I needed a moment of quiet. Performances are emotionally demanding. Because you give so much of yourself in them, Cassian observed. It wasn't a question but a recognition of something he had witnessed repeatedly. Allegra looked at him with slight surprise. Yes, exactly that. Does it drain you? That level of emotional investment. It's more like redistribution than depletion, she explained. I channel emotions that need expression. Sometimes they're my own, sometimes they belong to the music itself, sometimes they come from the people and stories that inspired the composition. Cassian considered this perspective so different from his compartmentalized approach to life. I've never understood that kind of emotional fluidity. In my world, feelings are generally inconvenient. That sounds lonely, Allegra said simply. The observation wasn't judgmental, just honest. Yet it struck Cassian with unexpected force. Loneliness wasn't a condition he generally acknowledged, even to himself. His life was filled with people, activity, achievement. Yet something in Allegra's gentle assessment resonated with a truth he usually kept carefully buried. Perhaps it is, he admitted, the rare honesty feeling strangely liberating. Though I've never really thought about it that way. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the city lights glittering around them. Something had shifted in their dynamic. A small but significant step toward genuine connection. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow? Cassian asked suddenly. Not a foundation event. Not a professional meeting. Just dinner. The invitation hung between them, a clear step across the boundary Allegra had established. She studied him thoughtfully, weighing something in her mind. Yes, she said finally. I'd like that. That dinner marked the beginning of a relationship neither had anticipated. They met at a small, unpretentious restaurant in the village, far from the exclusive establishments where Cassian was usually seen. Over simple food and conversation that stretched for hours, they discovered unexpected points of connection beneath their obvious differences. Cassian spoke of his childhood, the pressure of expectations, the emphasis on achievement over emotion, the strategic approach to human relationships that had been modeled for him. Allegra shared her upbringing in Savannah. The warmth of her family despite limited resources, the way music had been a language of emotional expression rather than technical accomplishment, the values that centered connection over acquisition. We were raised in different universes, Cassian observed as they walked through Washington Square Park after dinner, the spring night warm around them. Different circumstances, Allegra corrected gently, but the same human needs, connection, understanding, purpose. You believe those are universal, don't you? Beneath the different expressions and priorities. Cassian considered this. His business success had been built on identifying patterns and commonalities beneath surface variations. Yet he had rarely applied this analytical approach to emotional landscapes. I've never thought about it that way, he admitted. In my world, people's motivations seem primarily driven by status, security, and advantage. Because that's what you're looking for, Allegra suggested. We tend to find evidence for what we already believe. The observation was gently offered but profound in its implication, that Cassian's transactional view of human interaction might be self-reinforcing, a filter that prevented him from seeing other dimensions of experience. Their relationship developed with a careful, measured pace that suited them both. Allegra maintained her modest apartment and independent career, continuing to teach and perform beyond the foundation projects. Cassian respected her need for personal space and professional autonomy, never using his financial resources to override her preferences. Yet, inevitably, their different worlds began to intersect. Allegra occasionally accompanied Cassian to business events, where her natural warmth and genuine interest in people created connections his strategic networking never achieved. Cassian attended small performances in community venues where Allegra played, sitting anonymously in the audience, experiencing music in settings far removed from elite concert halls. You're changing him, observed Eleanor Bergman after witnessing Cassian patiently listening to an elderly community member's stories at a foundation event. I've known Cassian for years, and I've never seen him give anyone that kind of undivided attention without calculating the benefit. I'm not trying to change him, Allegra replied. I'm just responding to who he is beneath the public persona. That's precisely what's changing him, my dear. Being truly seen is a powerful experience for someone who has spent a lifetime performing a role. As their personal connection deepened, Cassian's professional support for Allegra's career expanded. He introduced her to influential arts patrons, arranged prestigious performance opportunities, and funded recording sessions for her original compositions. These efforts came from genuine appreciation for her talent, yet they inevitably created a complex power dynamic that became increasingly difficult to navigate. The first significant tension emerged around a recording contract offered by a major label. The terms were restrictive, demanding commercial adaptations of Allegra's compositions and control over her performance schedule. Cassian, reviewing the contract at Allegra's request, immediately identified the problematic clauses. "This is exploitative," he told her, setting the document aside. "They're trying to commercialize your work without respecting its integrity." "I thought as much," Allegra sighed, relieved by his confirmation of her instincts. "But they're offering distribution I couldn't access otherwise." "You don't need them," Cassian said decisively. "I can arrange better terms through my connections. A boutique label that will respect your artistic direction while providing the necessary promotion and distribution." The offer was generous, well-intentioned, and completely aligned with Allegra's artistic goals. Yet something in his confident assumption of control, the ease with which he could rearrange her professional opportunities through his influence, created a subtle discomfort she couldn't immediately articulate. "Thank you," she said carefully, "but I should explore options independently first. I need to understand the landscape myself, not just have solutions provided for me." Cassian looked surprised. "That seems unnecessarily difficult. My connections could resolve this immediately." "It's not about efficiency," Allegra tried to explain. "It's about agency. About making informed choices rather than having paths cleared for me. Even if the outcome would be identical, the outcome isn't the only thing that matters. The process does too." This fundamental difference in perspective, Cassian's focus on efficient results versus Allegra's valuing of personal agency and process, would emerge repeatedly as their relationship deepened. It reflected their different life experiences. Cassian's world of strategic advantage and power leverage versus Allegra's emphasis on authentic growth and earned understanding. Despite these occasional tensions, their connection continued to deepen. Cassian found himself increasingly drawn to Allegra's emotional authenticity and quiet strength. She offered something his wealth and power couldn't purchase: genuine presence unmarred by calculation or agenda. With her, he occasionally experienced moments of true relaxation, where the constant strategic awareness that governed his life temporarily subsided. For Allegra, Cassian revealed complexities that contradicted his public image. Behind the ruthless businessman was someone capable of surprising sensitivity. A man who remembered her favorite flowers, who listened intently when she explained the emotional architecture of a composition, who occasionally revealed vulnerabilities quickly concealed behind his polished exterior. 6 months into their relationship, Cassian invited Allegra to accompany him to his Hampton estate for a weekend, a significant step in their evolving connection. The property was exactly what she might have expected. Sprawling oceanfront grounds, architectural perfection, every luxury detail meticulously executed. Yet it felt strangely impersonal, like an exceptionally high-end hotel rather than a home. "Do you actually relax here?" Allegra asked as they walked along the private beach, the Atlantic stretching before them. Cassian considered the question with unusual thoughtfulness. "I'm not sure I know what relaxation truly feels like," he admitted. "There's always the next deal, the next challenge, the next target. That sounds exhausting. It's what I was raised for. Achievement, advancement, constant forward motion. And if you stopped moving forward, what would happen?" The question seemed to unsettle him. I've never considered that a viable option. That evening, as they sat on the terrace watching the sunset, Cassian surprised Allegra with an unexpected revelation. I've been thinking about establishing a more structured arts foundation, he said. Not just project-based funding, but a comprehensive program supporting musicians like you, artists whose work has depth and integrity, but limited commercial appeal. That sounds wonderful, Allegra replied sincerely. There's so much talent that never reaches audiences because it doesn't fit commercial formulas. You could help shape it, Cassian continued. Your perspective would ensure it maintains artistic integrity rather than just corporate philanthropy optics. The offer was generous and aligned with values Allegra deeply held. Yet something in his phrasing, the casual assumption of her involvement, the way he was already incorporating her into his future plans, triggered a subtle caution. I'd be happy to offer input, she said carefully, though I'd need to balance any involvement with my own creative work and teaching. Cassian looked momentarily surprised by her measured response. He was accustomed to people eagerly accepting opportunities he extended, not establishing conditions or limitations. Of course, he said after a brief pause, your creative work remains the priority. The foundation would be structured around your existing commitments. His willingness to adapt his plans to accommodate her needs reassured Allegra. Yet the interaction highlighted a recurring pattern. Cassian's natural tendency to incorporate others into his vision rather than truly collaborating on a shared one. As their relationship approached the one-year mark, these subtle tensions became more pronounced. Cassian's world operated according to principles of control, efficiency, and strategic advantage. Allegra's centered on authenticity, process, and emotional truth. These differences created friction that became increasingly difficult to ignore. The catalyst for their first serious conflict came from an unexpected source. Allegra had been invited to perform at a prestigious international music festival, an opportunity she had secured through her own professional reputation, independent of Cassian's influence. The timing conflicted with an important business trip to Tokyo where Cassian had planned for her to accompany him. Can't you reschedule the performance? He asked when she explained the conflict. The Tokyo trip includes meetings with potential major donors for the Arts Foundation. Your presence would be valuable. This festival has been a professional goal for years, Allegra explained. It's recognition of my work on its own merits, not through connection to your foundation. I understand that, Cassian said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But timing is critical with these particular donors. We've been cultivating these relationships for months. We? Allegra questioned gently. Or you? This is your foundation vision, Cassian. One I support and am happy to contribute to, but not my primary professional focus. The distinction clearly surprised him. In Cassian's world, once something became a priority for him, those in his orbit naturally aligned their priorities accordingly. Allegra's maintenance of separate professional goals, especially when they conflicted with his plans, was unfamiliar territory. I thought we were building something together, he said, genuine confusion in his voice. We are building a relationship together, Allegra clarified. But that doesn't mean our professional identities merge. I need to maintain my independent career and artistic voice. The conversation revealed a fundamental misalignment in their understanding of partnership. For Cassian, efficiency dictated consolidation of goals and resources. For Allegra, authenticity required maintaining distinct identities even within a loving relationship. This philosophical difference might have been navigated through open communication and mutual compromise. But as their relationship deepened, Cassian's instinct for control, temporarily subdued by the novelty of genuine connection, began to reassert itself in subtle ways. He began offering unsolicited advice about Allegra's career decisions. He questioned her continued teaching of students from low-income backgrounds, suggesting her time could be more strategically allocated. He expressed frustration when she maintained her modest apartment rather than moving into his penthouse, describing her choice as unnecessarily complicated. Each suggestion was framed as practical support rather than control. Each came from a genuine desire to enhance her life and work. Yet collectively, they revealed a man accustomed to shaping his environment according to his vision, uncomfortable with elements he couldn't optimize or direct. For her part, Allegra found herself increasingly guarded about certain decisions, anticipating Cassian's well-intentioned but controlling input. She began compartmentalizing aspects of her life, maintaining spaces and relationships that existed completely separate from his influence. The pattern was subtle but significant. A relationship that had begun with unusual openness was developing hidden corners and careful calculations. The very qualities that had drawn them together, Cassian's admiration for Allegra's authentic expression, Allegra's appreciation for Cassian's hidden depths, were being compromised by the fundamental power imbalance between them. This growing tension might have resolved through honest conversation and mutual adjustment. But events were already in motion that would transform their private struggles into public conflict. Events neither could have anticipated as they navigated the delicate balance between love and autonomy, between connection and independence. For Cassian Rourke, accustomed to solving problems through strategic action rather than emotional awareness, was about to make a decision that would irrevocably alter both their lives. A decision born from his deepest instincts for control, protection, and ownership, yet destined to destroy the very connection he was trying to secure. 18 months into their relationship, Allegra and Cassian had achieved an uneasy equilibrium. Their connection had deepened in many ways. They shared genuine intimacy, supported each other's core values, and had created meaningful memories together. Yet the fundamental tension between his need for control and her requirement for autonomy remained unresolved, creating a fault line beneath their otherwise solid foundation. Allegra's career had flourished during this period. Her compositions were being performed in prestigious venues internationally. A recording of her community-inspired works had received critical acclaim and modest commercial success. She had expanded her teaching to include masterclasses at several conservatories, while maintaining her commitment to students from underserved communities. Cassian took genuine pride in her accomplishments, though he couldn't help filtering them through his own perspective, seeing her success partly as validation of his support and influence rather than solely as the result of her talent and dedication. This subtle reframing wasn't malicious. It simply reflected his deeply ingrained worldview where relationships were strategic alliances and outcomes were measured in terms of investment and return. For her part, Allegra had grown increasingly adept at navigating Cassian's world without being absorbed by it. She maintained her modest apartment even while spending most nights at his penthouse. She continued teaching students who could barely afford lessons alongside those from wealthy families. She accepted some of Cassian's professional assistance while firmly declining offers that would compromise her artistic independence. This careful balance might have sustained them indefinitely had external pressures not forced the underlying issues to the surface. The catalyst came in the form of a major opportunity. Allegra was offered a 2-year international residency program that would take her to music conservatories across Europe, Asia, and South America. The position would allow her to compose, perform, and teach in diverse cultural contexts. A dream opportunity aligned perfectly with her artistic vision. When she shared the news with Cassian over dinner at his penthouse, his initial response seemed supportive. "That's extraordinary recognition," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "Completely deserved." "Thank you," Allegra replied, relieved by his positive reaction. "It's an incredible opportunity to expand my compositional language and connect with musicians from different traditions." "Absolutely," Cassian agreed. "Though the timing is challenging with the foundation launch scheduled for next year. We'll need to coordinate carefully." The subtle shift from celebration to strategic planning didn't escape Allegra's notice. "The residency would mean significant travel," she said carefully. "I'd be based internationally for much of the 2 years." Cassian set down his glass, his expression shifting slightly. "That seems unnecessarily disruptive. Surely they could modify the structure, perhaps shorter international segments with returns to New York between." "That would defeat the purpose," Allegra explained. "The immersive experience in each location is central to the program's value." "I understand the artistic appeal," Cassian said in the measured tone he used when transitioning to negotiation mode. But practically speaking, maintaining our relationship and your involvement with the Foundation would be extremely difficult with that schedule. The comment revealed his assumption that her decisions should be evaluated partly through the lens of his priorities, a perspective Allegra had encountered repeatedly throughout their relationship. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Cassian," she said quietly. "Professionally and artistically significant in ways I can't overstate." "I'm not suggesting you decline it entirely," he clarified. "Just that we negotiate modifications that accommodate our shared commitments." "Our shared commitments," Allegra repeated thoughtfully. "And if those can't be perfectly aligned? If this opportunity requires temporary prioritization of my professional development?" The question hung between them, a direct challenge to Cassian's fundamental assumption that their life trajectories should be efficiently harmonized rather than occasionally divergent. "I thought we were building something together," he said, echoing words from previous discussions. "Something that required mutual accommodation and shared vision." "We are," Allegra agreed. "But building together doesn't mean erasing individual paths. Sometimes it means supporting each other through periods of separate growth." The conversation continued in this vein, Cassian proposing practical solutions that would minimize disruption to their current arrangement. Allegra gently but firmly maintaining that the opportunity's value lay precisely in its immersive, uncompromised structure. They reached no resolution that evening, agreeing to revisit the discussion after gathering more details about the residency's requirements. But the interaction had surfaced their fundamental disconnect more clearly than ever before. Cassian's instinct to optimize and control versus Allegra's need for authentic experience and independent growth. In the days that followed, Cassian did what he always did when facing a problem. He analyzed it strategically and developed a solution aligned with his objectives. The residency represented a threat to the relationship structure he valued and the foundation plans he had developed. Therefore, the situation required intervention to maintain optimal outcomes. Rather than addressing the emotional core of their disconnect, his difficulty accepting Allegra's independent priorities, her resistance to his controlling tendencies, Cassian focused on creating a structural solution that would secure his interests while appearing to support hers. The result was a contract, a detailed legal document drafted by his attorneys under strict confidentiality. On the surface, it appeared to be a generous sponsorship agreement. Rourke Enterprises would become the primary financial backer of Allegra's international residency, providing enhanced funding that would expand the program's resources and reach. But embedded within the seemingly supportive framework were clauses that fundamentally altered the nature of their relationship. Allegra would be required to return to New York at least 1 week per month for foundation-related events and relationship maintenance. All compositions created during the residency would be jointly owned by Allegra and Rourke Enterprises, with the company retaining final approval rights for public performance and distribution. A non-compete clause would prevent Allegra from accepting other sponsorship or collaborative opportunities without Rourke Enterprises' written approval. The residency schedule would be subject to modification based on sponsor priorities, effectively giving Cassian veto power over Allegra's international commitments. In essence, the contract transformed what had been a personal relationship with professional boundaries into a business arrangement with personal obligations. One that prioritized Cassian's need for control over Allegra's artistic independence. The document represented Cassian's worldview perfectly. Problems should be solved through strategic leverage. Relationships should be structured for optimal efficiency. Potential conflicts should be preemptively managed through binding agreements. In his mind, he was offering a practical solution that would allow Allegra to pursue her opportunity while maintaining their connection and his influence. What he failed to understand, what his entire upbringing and business experience had never taught him, was that love cannot be secured through contractual obligation, that genuine connection requires freedom rather than constraint, that trust is built through respect for autonomy, not through legal enforcement of compliance. Cassian planned to present the contract during a weekend at his Hampton estate, framing it as a supportive sponsorship that would enhance Allegra's residency opportunity. He arranged for his legal team to prepare the documents, instructing them to emphasize the financial benefits while minimizing the control aspects in the presentation materials. But fate, or perhaps the universe's sense of poetic justice, intervened. Due to a clerical error, a draft of the contract was delivered to Allegra's apartment rather than to Cassian's office for final review. The courier, finding no one home, left the sealed envelope with a neighbor who later brought it to Allegra's door. Seeing Rourke Enterprises on the return address, Allegra assumed it contained information related to the foundation projects she was involved with. She opened it without hesitation, expecting routine documents requiring her signature. What she found instead was a comprehensive blueprint for her future. One designed without her input, structured to serve another's priorities, and fundamentally at odds with the independence she had always maintained was essential to her well-being and creative integrity. As Allegra read through the contract's details, the full implications of what Cassian had planned became devastatingly clear. This wasn't a supportive partner helping her pursue an opportunity. This was a strategic businessman securing his interests by restricting her autonomy. This wasn't love-seeking compromise. This was power asserting control. Most painful was the realization that Cassian had developed this plan secretly, working with his legal team behind her back rather than engaging in honest conversation about their differing needs and priorities. The man who had seemed to value her authentic voice had attempted to contractually limit that voice's independence. When Cassian arrived at her apartment that evening, he found Allegra sitting at her small dining table, the contract spread before her, her expression composed but distant in a way he had never seen before. "You weren't supposed to see that yet," he said after a moment of stunned silence. "It's still in draft form." "That's your concern?" Allegra asked quietly. "The timing of my discovery, not the content of what you were planning." "The presentation materials would have clarified the benefits," Cassian explained, shifting immediately to damage control mode. "This sponsorship would significantly enhance the residency's resources while ensuring our relationship and foundation work remain viable." "This isn't sponsorship," Allegra corrected, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "It's ownership. Control disguised as support." "That's not fair," Cassian protested. "I'm trying to create a structure that allows you to pursue your opportunity while maintaining our shared commitments. By claiming ownership rights to my creative work, by giving yourself veto power over my schedule, by restricting my professional autonomy." Allegra shook her head slowly. "This isn't about supporting me, Cassian. It's about controlling me," Allegra continued, her voice quiet but firm. "It's about ensuring that even when I'm physically distant, I remain under your influence." "That's not how I see it," Cassian insisted, moving to sit across from her. "I'm trying to protect what we've built together, to ensure your opportunity doesn't undermine our relationship or the foundation work." "By drafting a secret contract rather than having an honest conversation?" Allegra asked. "By making decisions about my creative work without consulting me? By treating our relationship as a business arrangement that needs legal enforcement?" Cassian's expression shifted subtly, the slight tightening around his eyes that appeared whenever his perspective was fundamentally challenged. "The contract is a practical framework, not an emotional statement. It creates clarity and prevents misunderstandings. It creates ownership where there should be partnership," Allegra corrected. "It establishes control where there should be trust." She stood, moving away from the table and the contract that had revealed so much about the man she had believed she knew. "I've always been clear about what I need in a relationship, Cassian. Respect for my independence, space for individual growth, trust without constant oversight. And I've given you those things," he countered. "I've supported your career, respected your teaching commitments, accepted your insistence on maintaining this apartment rather than moving in with me. Superficial accommodations that didn't challenge your fundamental need for control," Allegra said with sudden clarity. "You've tolerated my independence only where it didn't significantly impact your plans or priorities." The observation struck with precision, momentarily silencing Cassian's practiced responses. In that silence, Allegra saw confirmation of what the contract had revealed, that beneath his genuine affection and admiration lay a fundamental inability to truly accept her autonomy when it conflicted with his desires. "What do you want from me?" Cassian asked finally, his tone shifting to the careful neutrality he used in difficult negotiations. "I wanted a partner who could love without possessing," Allegra replied simply. "Who could support without controlling. Who could trust my decisions even when they created temporary distance or inconvenience." The past tense wasn't lost on Cassian. "And now I need to leave," Allegra said, the words bringing both pain and clarity. "This contract shows me who you truly are. Someone who sees relationships as assets to be managed, not connections to be nurtured." "You're overreacting," Cassian said, his composure beginning to fracture. "This is one document, one approach to a complex situation. It doesn't define everything between us." "But it does," Allegra insisted gently. "It reveals how you fundamentally understand love and partnership as extensions of your business philosophy. Control, efficiency, strategic advantage." She moved to the window, looking out at the city lights that had witnessed their relationship's evolution and now its dissolution. "I can't build a life with someone who secretly plans to restrict my freedom while calling it support, who drafts contracts instead of having conversations, who sees my independence as a problem to be managed rather than a quality to be respected." "Allegra, please," Cassian said, an unfamiliar note of genuine vulnerability entering his voice. "We can tear up the contract. Forget it ever existed. Start fresh." "But we can't unknow what it revealed," she replied sadly. "I can't unknow that while I was sharing my excitement about an opportunity, you were quietly planning to control it. I can't unknow that your instinct wasn't to adapt to my growth but to contain it." The finality in her tone triggered Cassian's deepest fear, loss of control over something he valued. His response was immediate and instinctive, a return to the leverage-based approach that had served him in business negotiations. "The residency opportunity came through foundation connections," he reminded her. "Many of your current performance venues were secured through my influence. If you end our relationship this way, those professional doors may close." The implicit threat hung in the air between them, a confirmation of everything the contract had revealed about how Cassian understood power and relationship. Allegra looked at him with quiet sadness. "Thank you for making my decision absolutely clear." She moved to her closet, pulling out a small suitcase. With methodical calm, she began packing essential items, clothes, personal documents, a few cherished books. "What are you doing?" Cassian asked, genuine alarm replacing his negotiation tactics. "Leaving," Allegra replied simply. "Tonight." "This is irrational," Cassian protested. "Where will you go? What about your things at my apartment? What about the foundation projects?" "I'll stay with a friend until I sort out next steps," Allegra said, continuing to pack with quiet determination. "I'll arrange to collect my things from your apartment when you're at work. As for the foundation projects, I'll complete my current commitments remotely, but I won't be taking on new ones." The practical clarity of her responses, the absence of emotional drama or negotiating tactics, left Cassian momentarily speechless. This wasn't a ploy for concessions or attention. This was a woman making a clear-eyed decision based on revealed truth. "Allegra," he said finally, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "I love you." She paused her packing, turning to face him directly. "I believe you do in the way you understand love. But your version of love requires possession and control. Mine requires freedom and trust. They're fundamentally incompatible." As she closed her suitcase, Cassian made one final attempt. The contract was a mistake, a terrible misjudgment. But one document shouldn't outweigh 18 months of connection, of building something meaningful together. "The contract wasn't the problem," Allegra corrected gently. "It was the symptom. The problem is that you believe love and control are compatible. That partnership means alignment with your vision rather than respect for separate paths. That's not something a torn-up contract can fix." She gathered her suitcase and purse, pausing at the door for a final moment. "I wish you well, Cassian. I hope someday you find the courage to love without needing to possess, to connect without needing to control." With those words, she walked out of the apartment and out of his life, leaving behind the contract that had revealed the unbridgeable gap between their understandings of love and partnership. What neither of them knew, what would transform their private heartbreak into public conflict, was that Allegra carried more than just her suitcase as she left that night. Within her, new life was beginning to form. A child conceived in love but destined to be born into the shadow of its father's most fundamental flaws. For Cassian Rourke, who had spent a lifetime equating control with security and power with worth, was about to face a situation he couldn't manage through contracts or leverage. A situation that would ultimately force him to confront the true cost of his inability to love without possessing. And Allegra Wynford, who had always believed in the power of music to express truths beyond words, would soon find herself composing the most challenging piece of her life. A melody of motherhood played against the harsh counterpoint of legal battles and public scrutiny. The first weeks after leaving Cassian were a blur of practical challenges and emotional aftershocks. Allegra stayed temporarily with her friend Mira, a fellow musician who asked no questions but provided quiet support and a spare bedroom in her Brooklyn apartment. From this temporary sanctuary, Allegra began rebuilding her independent life, finding a small apartment she could afford on her teaching and performance income, retrieving her belongings from Cassian's penthouse while he was at work, and restructuring her professional commitments to maintain distance from Rourke Enterprises. Cassian's initial response followed predictable patterns. He sent elaborate flower arrangements with carefully crafted notes. He attempted to schedule meetings to discuss transition plans for foundation projects. He enlisted mutual acquaintances to casually mention his regret and desire to reconcile. When these indirect approaches yielded no response, his tactics shifted to more direct intervention. Appearing at performances, waiting outside her teaching studio, even attempting to join a masterclass she was conducting at Juilliard. Allegra maintained firm boundaries throughout, responding to professional communications with brief, courteous emails while ignoring personal overtures entirely. The foundation projects she had committed to were completed with professional thoroughness, but no engagement beyond contractual requirements. When Cassian appeared at public events, she acknowledged him with the same polite distance she offered any former colleague. This pattern might have continued indefinitely, Cassian attempting to regain control, Allegra maintaining her hard-won independence, had biology not intervened to fundamentally alter their disconnection. 6 weeks after leaving Cassian's apartment, Allegra experienced the first symptoms: morning nausea, unusual fatigue, heightened sensitivity to certain smells. A missed period, then another. A home test confirmed what her body had already begun telling her. She was pregnant. The news landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through every aspect of her carefully reconstructed life. Practical questions arose immediately. How would this affect the international residency she had accepted? Could she maintain her teaching and performance schedule through pregnancy and early motherhood? How would she manage financially as a single parent? But beneath these practical concerns lay a deeper, more complex question. What role, if any, should Cassian have in their child's life? Allegra spent days in careful reflection, consulting no one, playing her piano late into the night as she had always done when processing difficult emotions. The music that emerged was unlike anything she had composed before. Complex, questioning melodies interwoven with unexpected moments of clarity and resolution. By the time she reached her decision, Allegra had composed nearly an hour of new music. A suite that charted her emotional journey from discovery through deliberation to determination. The final movement, which she titled simply Choice, embodied the clarity she had reached through her musical exploration. Cassian had a right to know about the child. The child had a right to know their father. But these rights did not override Allegra's responsibility to protect both herself and her child from the controlling dynamics that had ended her relationship with Cassian. The path forward would require careful boundaries, clear communication, and unwavering commitment to her child's well-being above all else. At 12 weeks pregnant, after confirming the pregnancy's viability with her doctor, Allegra composed a letter to Cassian. Not an email that could be immediately responded to, not a phone call that might become emotionally charged, but a thoughtful, handwritten letter that would allow her to communicate completely before he had the opportunity to react. Cassian, she wrote, I am writing to share news that will affect both our lives significantly. I am pregnant with our child, due in early February. I have given careful thought to how to approach the situation in a way that honors both your right to know your child and my responsibility to create a healthy environment for their upbringing. I am not writing to request a reconciliation of our relationship. The fundamental differences that led to our separation remain unchanged. However, I do believe that children benefit from knowing both parents when possible, provided those relationships are healthy and supportive. My hope is that we can establish a co-parenting arrangement that allows you to be present in our child's life while respecting the boundaries necessary for my well-being. This will require a level of trust and respect for autonomy that was absent in our romantic relationship. I am not seeking financial support for myself. I have accepted the international residency, modified slightly to accommodate the pregnancy, and will continue my teaching and performance work. My needs are met through my own professional efforts. However, there is one specific request I would like to make. Our child will be born into a world of music, as I was. The single most important gift my parents gave me was access to a piano from my earliest memories. I would like to provide the same for our child, not a digital keyboard or temporary solution, but a real instrument that can become a lifelong companion. Given my current financial situation and the constraints of my new apartment, purchasing even a modest upright piano is beyond my means at present. If you wish to contribute to our child's early development, helping to secure this instrument would be a meaningful and appropriate gesture. I am open to discussing co-parenting arrangements once you have had time to process this news. I ask only that you respect my request for written communication at this stage, rather than unscheduled visits or calls. Allegra. The letter was factual, respectful, and clear, establishing both an openness to Cassian's involvement in their child's life and firm boundaries around how that involvement would be structured. The request for a piano was both practical and symbolic. A specific need that would benefit their child's development without creating ongoing financial entanglement between Allegra and Cassian. After mailing the letter to Cassian's office address, Allegra focused on preparing for the changes ahead. She modified her teaching schedule to allow for adequate rest. She worked with the residency program directors to adjust the international segments to accommodate her pregnancy and early postpartum period. She began transforming her small second bedroom from a music studio into a nursery, researching essential items while maintaining her commitment to simplicity and mindful consumption. Throughout these preparations, she experienced the normal anxieties of impending parenthood, amplified by her circumstances as a single mother with a complicated co-parenting situation ahead. Yet beneath these concerns ran a current of quiet certainty. This child, however unexpected, was already deeply loved and would be raised with the same values that had shaped Allegra's own life. Authenticity, creativity, emotional honesty, and the understanding that true worth comes from character rather than circumstance. 2 weeks passed with no response from Cassian. Allegra had anticipated a delay. The news was significant and would require adjustment to his carefully structured life plans. She continued her preparations, neither anxious about his silence nor hopeful for a particular response. Then came the knock that would transform their private situation into public conflict. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Allegra had just finished teaching a student and was preparing for her own practice session when a sharp, authoritative knock sounded at her apartment door. Opening it, she found a stern-faced woman in a business suit, holding a leather portfolio. Allegra Wynford? The woman asked, her tone professionally detached. Yes, Allegra confirmed, a sense of foreboding settling over her. I'm here on behalf of Rourke Enterprises' legal department, the woman stated, extending an envelope. You've been served. The envelope contained a subpoena, a formal legal demand requiring Allegra to appear in court regarding allegations of attempted financial coercion and relationship exploitation. The accompanying legal filing, dense with technical language and aggressive accusations, essentially characterized her letter about the pregnancy as an attempt to extract financial benefit through emotional manipulation. Cassian Rourke, the billionaire venture capitalist who had once claimed to love her, was suing the mother of his unborn child. The shock was physical. A wave of nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy and everything to do with the profound betrayal contained in those legal documents. Where Allegra had offered openness to co-parenting and a simple, specific request to benefit their child, Cassian had responded with legal aggression and public accusation. As the initial shock subsided, Allegra's protective instincts surfaced, not for herself, but for the child growing within her. The stress of a legal battle could threaten her pregnancy. The public nature of court proceedings would create a permanent digital record that would follow their child throughout life. The adversarial framing would make healthy co-parenting nearly impossible. Yet she had no choice but to respond. Ignoring a subpoena wasn't an option, and allowing Cassian's false narrative to stand unchallenged would set a dangerous precedent for their future interactions. With hands that trembled slightly but a mind that remained clear, Allegra called the one person she knew could help navigate this situation. Her father's cousin, Elena Valdez, a family law attorney in Manhattan. Though they weren't close, family connections remained strong, and Elena had always expressed admiration for Allegra's musical career. "This is unprecedented," Elena said after reviewing the documents. "He's essentially suing you for informing him about his own child and requesting a piano. The legal theory is thin at best, malicious at worst. What are my options?" Allegra asked, her hand resting protectively over her still flat abdomen. "We respond forcefully," Elena stated, professional indignation evident in her tone. "This isn't just about defending against his accusations. It's about establishing the framework for your child's future. If we allow this aggressive approach to succeed, it sets the pattern for every interaction going forward." Over the following days, Elena helped Allegra prepare a comprehensive response. Not just a defense against Cassian's allegations, but a countersuit addressing the real issues at stake. Appropriate child support, compensation for pregnancy-related expenses, and long-term educational funding for their child. "We're not being greedy," Elena assured Allegra, who was uncomfortable with the financial aspects of the legal response. "We're establishing that he cannot use legal intimidation to avoid appropriate responsibility. The amounts requested are reasonable given his resources and the child's needs." As the legal process began its slow, methodical progression, Allegra's pregnancy continued to develop. Her body changed, her emotions deepened, and her connection to the life growing within her strengthened daily. Morning sickness subsided, replaced by the first fluttering movements of her child. Gentle reminders of the real stakes in this unexpected conflict. The stress took its toll, however. Her blood pressure rose concerning her doctor. She experienced difficulty sleeping, occasional panic attacks, and periods of overwhelming anxiety about the future. The international residency had to be further modified, with several segments postponed until after the baby's birth. Through it all, Allegra maintained her commitment to her music. Teaching, performing when physically able, and composing new work inspired by her evolving experience of pregnancy amid conflict. The compositions that emerged during this period were among her most powerful. Complex emotional landscapes that transformed anxiety, uncertainty, and protective love into sound that moved listeners to tears. "Your music has changed," observed her longtime mentor, Dr. Eleanor Harmon, after attending a small performance. "There's a new depth, a fierce tenderness I haven't heard before. Becoming a mother changes everything," Allegra replied simply. "Even the music." As her pregnancy progressed into the second trimester, the legal battle intensified. Cassian's team expanded their allegations, characterizing Allegra as an opportunist who had deliberately conceived to gain financial advantage. They demanded paternity testing, extensive financial disclosures, and psychological evaluations, aggressive tactics designed to intimidate rather than resolve. Elena responded with steady, methodical legal work, neither escalating the conflict unnecessarily nor backing down from legitimate claims. "He's used to opponents who either crumble under pressure or match his aggressive tactics," she explained to Allegra. "We'll do neither." Calm, factual, and focused on the child's well-being. That's our approach. The case began attracting media attention. First in legal publications noting the unusual nature of the pre-birth custody dispute, then in financial press covering the billionaire angle, and finally in mainstream outlets drawn to the dramatic contrast between the powerful businessman and the pregnant musician. Headlines ranged from factual to sensationalized. Tech billionaire Rourke in prenatal custody dispute. Venture capital giant challenges paternity claim from former girlfriend. Pianist versus billionaire. The custody battle before birth. The public exposure was excruciating for Allegra, who had always valued privacy and authenticity over publicity. Photographers began appearing outside her apartment building and teaching locations. Students and colleagues asked uncomfortable questions. Performance venues received calls from tabloid reporters seeking comments or inside information. Through Elena's connections, Allegra secured a temporary restraining order preventing media from approaching within 50 feet of her home or workplaces. A small protection that nevertheless provided some relief from the constant intrusion. Cassian, meanwhile, maintained public silence, issuing only a brief statement through his communications team. Mr. Rourke is addressing a private matter through appropriate legal channels and will not be commenting publicly out of respect for all parties involved. The statement's implied concern for privacy stood in stark contrast to the aggressive legal strategy that had transformed a personal situation into public spectacle. This disconnect revealed much about Cassian's approach, controlling the narrative while disclaiming responsibility for the conflict. As her pregnancy entered the third trimester, Allegra's physical vulnerability increased alongside her legal challenges. Her doctor expressed concern about elevated blood pressure and signs of prenatal stress, recommending reduced activities and increased rest. The international residency was officially postponed until the following year, with the program directors expressing remarkable understanding given the circumstances. Financial pressures mounted as Allegra's performance schedule necessarily decreased. Teaching remained possible, but the energy required for full concert performances became prohibitive as her pregnancy advanced. Legal costs, even with Elena's reduced family rate, created additional strain on her limited resources. Yet throughout this difficult period, unexpected support emerged from various quarters. Former students organized a benefit concert to help with expenses. Colleagues offered teaching referrals to maintain her income. The small music community that had always valued Allegra's contributions rallied around her with practical assistance and emotional encouragement. Most surprisingly, several of Cassian's business associates reached out privately to offer support. People who had met Allegra during their relationship and recognized the disconnect between Cassian's legal allegations and her actual character. While they couldn't publicly oppose him, they provided information, resources, and behind-the-scenes assistance that proved invaluable to her legal defense. As her due date approached, Allegra focused increasingly on preparing for her child's arrival. The nursery took shape, a simple but beautiful space filled with books, soft colors, and a small keyboard suitable for infant exploration. Childbirth classes, pediatrician selection, and practical preparations provided welcome distraction from the ongoing legal battle. The piano she had requested in her initial letter, the simple need that had triggered Cassian's disproportionate legal response, remained absent. Instead, Allegra arranged her teaching schedule to allow access to practice pianos at the conservatory, determined that her child would hear live music from birth even if not within their own home. In the final weeks of pregnancy, as her body prepared for birth and her mind for motherhood, Allegra composed a lullaby for her unborn child, a gentle, hopeful melody that acknowledged the complexity of their circumstances while promising unwavering love and protection. She recorded it on the conservatory's grand piano, creating a simple video that captured both the music and her visibly pregnant form at the instrument. This private recording, never intended for public sharing, would eventually become a pivotal element in the legal proceedings, though Allegra couldn't have anticipated this as she played for an audience of one, the child growing beneath her heart. On a snowy February morning, after a difficult but uncomplicated labor, Allegra gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Looking into his tiny face for the first time, she was struck by the unmistakable resemblance to his father, the same distinctive green eyes, the same determined set to his small jaw. Yet there was something entirely new in this little person, something uniquely himself, already evident in his alert gaze and the way he responded to the sound of her voice. "Hello, Elliot," she whispered, the name she had chosen honoring her father while beginning its own story. "Welcome to the world. It's complicated out here, but I promise you'll never doubt that you are loved." In that moment of profound connection, the legal battles and public scrutiny receded into temporary insignificance. This child, this miraculous blend of herself and Cassian, yet entirely his own person, was the only reality that truly mattered. The peace was short-lived. 3 days after Elliot's birth, while Allegra was still recovering in the hospital, Elena arrived with grave news. Cassian's legal team had expanded their case dramatically, filing emergency motions for immediate paternity testing and temporary custody arrangements pending final court decisions. "He's claiming concern about the child's welfare given your unstable financial situation and professional commitments," Elena explained, her expression reflecting both professional outrage and personal concern. "It's a transparent attempt to establish control from the beginning." Allegra looked down at Elliot, sleeping peacefully against her chest, unaware of the conflict surrounding his existence. "He's never even seen his son," she said quietly. "Never asked about the birth or his health. Never expressed any personal interest beyond legal claims." "That's going to be central to our response," Elena assured her. "His actions demonstrate that this isn't about genuine concern for the child, but about control over you and the situation." The legal battle that had begun during pregnancy now escalated into a full custody dispute, with Cassian's considerable resources deployed against a new mother still recovering from childbirth. The contrast could not have been starker. A billionaire with unlimited legal and financial resources versus a musician holding her newborn while responding to court filings. Yet this very contrast began shifting public perception. Media coverage, initially focused on the sensational aspects of a billionaire's paternity dispute, increasingly highlighted the human dimensions of the conflict. Photos of Allegra carefully shielding Elliot from cameras while entering the courthouse created a powerful visual narrative that contradicted Cassian's legal claims about her fitness as a mother. As the case progressed through preliminary hearings, Cassian maintained his distance, appearing in court impeccably dressed and surrounded by his legal team but never approaching Allegra or asking to see his son. His testimony focused on financial stability, educational opportunities, and long-term security, framing his claim for significant custody in terms of resources rather than relationship. Allegra, by contrast, brought Elliot to every proceeding, caring for him in full view of the court while responding to questions with calm clarity. When asked about her financial situation, she acknowledged its limitations without apology. "I can't provide luxury, but I can provide stability, love, and a home filled with music and books. Material excess has never been my priority for myself or my child." The judge assigned to the case, the Honorable Sophia Martinez, known for her no-nonsense approach to family law, watched these contrasting presentations with careful attention. During one particularly aggressive line of questioning from Cassian's attorneys about Allegra's ability to provide appropriate advantages for the child, Judge Martinez interrupted. "Counsel, I'd like to clarify something," she said, her tone measured but firm. "This court's definition of a child's best interests extends beyond financial resources. Stability, emotional connection, and demonstrated commitment to parenting are equally significant factors in custody determinations." This judicial perspective, prioritizing relationship over resources, represented the first significant shift in the case's momentum. Cassian's legal strategy, built around his financial superiority and professional stability, began to show weaknesses when confronted with Allegra's evident devotion and hands-on parenting. As Elliot grew from newborn to infant, developing his own personality and responses, the contrast between his parents' approaches became increasingly evident. Allegra structured her life around his needs, adapting her teaching schedule to maximize time with him, bringing him to appropriate performances in a small bassinet, creating a home environment rich with music, language, and gentle stimulation. Cassian, meanwhile, continued to pursue custody through legal channels without establishing any personal relationship with his son. His court filings detailed elaborate plans for nannies, educational consultants, and development specialists, but he had yet to hold Elliot or learn basic information about his preferences and patterns. This disconnect reached its most visible expression during a court-ordered mediation session when Elliot was 4 months old. Designed to explore potential compromise before proceeding to trial, the session required both parents to be present with the child and a court-appointed mediator. When Elliot became fussy during the proceedings, Allegra naturally responded, adjusting his position, offering comfort, recognizing his specific cries and addressing the underlying needs. Cassian, seated across the table with his legal team, appeared completely disconnected from the actual child at the center of his custody claim. The mediator, an experienced family counselor, noted this dynamic in her report. There is a significant disparity in demonstrated parenting capacity. Ms. Wynford shows intuitive understanding of and response to the child's needs, while Mr. Rourke appears to have no established relationship or practical knowledge of his son's care. This professional assessment further shifted the case's direction, with Judge Martinez ordering a formal parenting capacity evaluation before proceeding to final custody determinations. The evaluation would include observed interactions between each parent and child, assessment of the home environments, and detailed parenting plans from both parties. For Allegra, this development represented cautious hope, an opportunity for objective evaluation based on actual parenting rather than financial resources or legal maneuvering. For Cassian, it presented an unprecedented challenge. A situation where his wealth and business acumen offered no advantage, where only genuine connection with his son would matter. As the evaluation process began, the fundamental question at the heart of their conflict came into sharper focus. Was this dispute truly about a father's desire to be present in his child's life? Or was it about a controlling man's inability to accept a situation he couldn't manage through money and power? The answer would emerge not through legal arguments or financial comparisons, but through the simple, profound truth revealed in a small courtroom with a toy keyboard and a mother's gentle hands. The morning Allegra received Cassian's subpoena marked the beginning of a nightmare she could never have anticipated. Standing in her apartment doorway, the legal document heavy in her hands, she experienced a moment of disbelief so profound it felt like stepping outside reality. The subpoena itself was intimidating enough, formal legal language demanding her appearance in court, threatening penalties for non-compliance. But the accompanying legal filing revealed the true nature of Cassian's response to her pregnancy news. Page after page of allegations, each more outrageous than the last. Plaintiff engaged in deliberate conception without defendant's knowledge or consent. Plaintiff's communication regarding pregnancy constitutes attempted emotional and financial coercion. Plaintiff's request for specific financial support represents a pattern of opportunistic behavior. The document transformed her straightforward letter, a respectful notification about their child and a simple request for a piano, into a calculated scheme for financial gain. It reframed her entire character through a lens of suspicion and manipulation, creating a narrative so divorced from reality that it left her breathless. When the process server departed, Allegra closed her door and sank to the floor, the legal papers scattered around her. Her first coherent thought was not for herself but for the child she carried. This stress can't be good for the baby. With trembling hands, she called her doctor's office, explaining the situation and requesting guidance on managing stress during pregnancy. The nurse practitioner offered practical advice, meditation techniques, prenatal yoga, regular monitoring, along with a recommendation for immediate legal counsel. This kind of stress can affect your blood pressure and the baby's development, the nurse explained gently. Getting proper legal support isn't just about the court case. It's about protecting your health and your child's well-being. This medical framing, the understanding that responding effectively to Cassian's legal attack was a form of prenatal care, helped Allegra move from shock to action. By that afternoon, she had contacted Elena Valdez and scheduled an appointment for the following day. Elena's office reflected her practical, no-nonsense approach to family law. Functional furniture, organized files, diplomas, and certifications displayed without ostentation. She reviewed Cassian's filing with increasing indignation, occasionally making notes or shaking her head at particularly outrageous claims. "This is not standard legal practice," she said finally, setting the documents aside. "This is intimidation masquerading as litigation. He's using the legal system as a weapon, hoping you'll be too overwhelmed to respond effectively." "Why?" Allegra asked, still struggling to understand the disproportionate response to her letter. "I didn't ask for anything unreasonable. Just a piano for our child and the possibility of co-parenting discussions." Elena's expression softened slightly. "Based on what you've told me about your relationship, this fits his pattern. When you ended the relationship, you took control away from him. When you decided to continue the pregnancy independently, you made another autonomous choice. When you sent that letter outlining clear boundaries and expectations, you established terms rather than accepting his." She tapped the legal filing. "This is his attempt to regain control, to put you on the defensive, to make you fear his resources and influence, to establish from the beginning that he will dictate the terms of any co-parenting arrangement." The assessment aligned with Allegra's own understanding of Cassian's character, yet the escalation to legal warfare still seemed extreme. "I never wanted conflict," she said quietly. "I just wanted clarity and appropriate boundaries. Unfortunately, for someone with his resources and temperament, the legal system offers a powerful tool for control," Elena explained. "Filing a lawsuit costs him nothing meaningful. It's a rounding error in his annual legal budget. But he knows it could devastate you financially and emotionally. So what do we do?" Allegra asked, her hand resting protectively over her abdomen. "We respond strategically," Elena said, her professional determination evident. "Not just defending against his allegations, but establishing our own legal framework that protects you and your child going forward." Over the next several hours, they developed a comprehensive approach. A motion to dismiss his baseless claims, a countersuit for appropriate child support and pregnancy expenses, and a request for court-supervised co-parenting mediation once the child was born. "We're not asking for anything excessive or punitive," Elena assured Allegra, who was uncomfortable with the financial aspects of the countersuit. "Just what any child would be entitled to given their father's resources. If we don't establish these expectations now, he'll use financial support as a control mechanism indefinitely." As they finalized their strategy, Elena addressed the practical realities Allegra now faced. "This will be expensive, time-consuming, and stressful. I'll reduce my usual rate given our family connection, but you should prepare for significant costs. More importantly, you need to protect your health and your pregnancy from the stress this process will create." Allegra nodded, already feeling the weight of what lay ahead. "I'll manage the legal costs somehow. As for the stress," she smiled faintly, "music has always been my refuge. That won't change now." In the days that followed, as Elena prepared their legal response, Allegra focused on creating stability amid chaos. She informed her closest friends and professional colleagues about the situation, knowing that Cassian's legal action would likely become public knowledge. She arranged her teaching and performance schedule to minimize physical strain while maintaining essential income. She began documenting everything, keeping detailed records of her pregnancy care, financial expenditures, and communications related to the case. Most importantly, she maintained her connection to music, teaching, practicing, and composing daily. The compositions that emerged during this period reflected her complex emotional landscape, pieces that began in dissonance and anxiety before finding their way to resolution and clarity. Musical narratives of challenge transformed into strength. When their legal response was filed 2 weeks later, Allegra felt a momentary sense of relief. They had answered Cassian's aggression with clear, factual counterclaims rather than emotional reaction. The legal system, at least, provided a structured framework for addressing the conflict, however painful the process might be. That relief evaporated when the first reporter called her cell phone, asking for comment on the Rourke paternity dispute. Somehow, despite family court records being theoretically private, details of the case had leaked to the media. By that evening, Allegra's name was appearing in financial news outlets alongside Cassian's. their private situation transformed into public entertainment. The media coverage followed predictable patterns, with headlines and framing largely determined by the outlet's typical audience. Financial publications emphasized the potential impact on Cassian's business empire and personal fortune. Entertainment sites focused on the romantic angle, the relationship between the billionaire and the musician that had ended dramatically. Tabloids constructed the most sensationalized narratives, often with minimal regard for factual accuracy. For Allegra, this public exposure was almost as devastating as the legal battle itself. She had always valued privacy and authenticity, keeping a deliberate distance from the public spotlight even as her musical career advanced. Now strangers were discussing her personal life, pregnancy, and character based on fragmentary information and Cassian's distorted legal claims. The first time she saw her own face on a news website, a performance photo used without permission alongside a speculative article about her relationship with Cassian, Allegra experienced a panic attack so severe she had to call her doctor. The physical symptoms were frightening. Racing heart, difficulty breathing, dizziness that made her fear for the pregnancy. "This is your body's response to extreme stress," her doctor explained during an emergency appointment. "We need to take this seriously, both for your health and your baby's development." The medical team developed a comprehensive stress management plan. Regular monitoring of her blood pressure and the baby's heartbeat, specific relaxation techniques, and a clear understanding of warning signs that would require immediate medical attention. They also provided a letter documenting the health risks of harassment and extreme stress during pregnancy. Documentation that Elena immediately used to secure a temporary restraining order against intrusive media coverage. The restraining order provided some relief, creating legal consequences for reporters who approached Allegra at her home or workplaces. But it couldn't prevent the continued publication of articles, the speculation on financial news programs, or the occasional photographer who maintained the required distance while still capturing images of her growing pregnancy. Throughout this period, Cassian maintained public silence, issuing only brief, carefully crafted statements through his communications team. This strategic absence from the public narrative allowed his legal claims to stand largely unchallenged in the media, creating an imbalanced portrayal that favored his perspective simply because it was the only one being actively promoted. "It's another form of control," Elena explained when Allegra expressed frustration about this dynamic. "He has a sophisticated PR operation that knows exactly how to manage public perception. We don't have those resources, but we do have something more powerful in the long run: the truth." As the case progressed through preliminary hearings and procedural motions, the contrast between Cassian's approach and Allegra's became increasingly evident. His legal team filed motion after motion, demanding extensive financial disclosures, questioning her ability to provide adequate care for a child, even attempting to restrict her travel during pregnancy, despite her doctor's confirmation that limited professional travel remained safe. Each motion required response, each response required Allegra's time and Elena's expertise, and each round of legal exchange drained both emotional energy and financial resources. The strategy was clear: overwhelm her with legal procedures until she became too exhausted or financially strained to maintain effective opposition. "He's trying to break you down," Elena observed after a particularly aggressive hearing where Cassian's lead attorney had questioned Allegra's financial stability for nearly 2 hours. "He believes everyone has a breaking point where they'll accept his terms just to end the conflict." "He doesn't understand me very well then," Allegra replied quietly. "Some things matter more than peace." As her pregnancy progressed into the second trimester, Allegra's physical vulnerability increased alongside the legal pressure. Morning sickness subsided, but fatigue became a constant companion. Her modified teaching and performance schedule maintained essential income but left little energy for anything beyond basic self-care. Legal costs mounted despite Elena's reduced family rate, creating financial strain that required careful budgeting and occasional help from friends. Yet throughout this difficult period, Allegra found unexpected sources of strength. Her students organized a benefit concert to help with expenses. Colleagues offered teaching referrals and performance opportunities that accommodated her pregnancy. The small music community that had always valued her contributions rallied around her with practical assistance and emotional encouragement. Most surprisingly, several of Cassian's business associates reached out privately to offer support. People who had met Allegra during their relationship and recognized the disconnect between his legal allegations and her actual character. While they couldn't publicly oppose him, they provided information, resources, and behind-the-scenes assistance that proved invaluable to her legal defense. One such ally was Marcus Chen, a venture capitalist who had worked closely with Cassian for years. During their relationship, Marcus had been impressed by Allegra's genuine interest in his family and cultural background, a stark contrast to the strategic networking that characterized most social interactions in their circle. Now, he contacted her through Elena, offering both moral support and practical assistance. "Cassian is making a terrible mistake," Marcus told her during a carefully arranged private meeting. "Many of us have tried to tell him so, but he's convinced himself this aggressive approach is necessary. I can't openly oppose him without risking business relationships, but I can help you understand his strategy and prepare accordingly." The insights Marcus provided about Cassian's decision-making patterns, the pressure points in his legal approach, and the internal disagreements among his advisors, proved invaluable as Elena refined their response strategy. More importantly, this support helped Allegra understand that not everyone in Cassian's world endorsed his actions, that there were people who recognized the injustice of his approach, even if they couldn't publicly challenge it. As her pregnancy entered the third trimester, the physical and emotional demands intensified. Her doctor expressed increasing concern about elevated blood pressure and signs of prenatal stress, recommending reduced activities and increased rest. The international residency was officially postponed until the following year, with the program directors expressing remarkable understanding given the circumstances. The legal proceedings continued their relentless pace, with depositions, hearings, and endless document exchanges. Cassian's team expanded their strategy, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about the importance of financial stability for child development and the potential limitations of Allegra's career on effective parenting. Elena countered with their own experts, child development specialists who emphasized the importance of consistent, loving care over material advantages. Financial planners who confirmed that Allegra's income, while modest compared to Cassian's billions, was entirely adequate for raising a child with all necessary resources. Throughout these proceedings, one fact remained starkly evident. Cassian had never expressed any personal interest in the child itself. His legal filings discussed custody arrangements, financial responsibilities, and parental rights in abstract terms. Not once did he inquire about the pregnancy's progress, the baby's health, or even the expected due date beyond what was legally required. This absence of genuine concern became a central element of Elena's strategy as they prepared for the more substantive hearings that would follow the child's birth. "His actions demonstrate that this isn't about being a father," she explained to Allegra. "It's about maintaining control. That distinction will matter tremendously when custody decisions are being made." As her due date approached, Allegra focused increasingly on preparing for her child's arrival. The nursery took shape, a simple but beautiful space filled with books, soft colors, and a small keyboard suitable for infant exploration. Childbirth classes, pediatrician selection, and practical preparations provided welcome distraction from the ongoing legal battle. The piano she had requested in her initial letter, the simple need that had triggered Cassian's disproportionate legal response, remained absent. Instead, Allegra arranged her teaching schedule to allow access to practice pianos at the conservatory, determined that her child would hear live music from birth even if not within their own home. In the final weeks of pregnancy, as her body prepared for birth and her mind for motherhood, Allegra composed a lullaby for her unborn child. A gentle, hopeful melody that acknowledged the complexity of their circumstances while promising unwavering love and protection. She recorded it on the conservatory's grand piano, creating a simple video that captured both the music and her visibly pregnant form at the instrument. This private recording, never intended for public sharing, would eventually become a pivotal element in the legal proceedings, though Allegra couldn't have anticipated this as she played for an audience of one. the child growing beneath her heart. On a snowy February morning, after a difficult but uncomplicated labor, Allegra gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Looking into his tiny face for the first time, she was struck by the unmistakable resemblance to his father. The same distinctive green eyes, the same determined set to his small jaw. Yet there was something entirely new in this little person, something uniquely himself, already evident in his alert gaze and the way he responded to the sound of her voice. "Hello, Elliot," she whispered, the name she had chosen honoring her father while beginning its own story. "Welcome to the world. It's complicated out here, but I promise you'll never doubt that you are loved." In that moment of profound connection, the legal battles and public scrutiny receded into temporary insignificance. This child, this miraculous blend of herself and Cassian, yet entirely his own person, was the only reality that truly mattered. The peace was short-lived. 3 days after Elliot's birth, while Allegra was still recovering in the hospital, Elena arrived with grave news. Cassian's legal team had expanded their case dramatically, filing emergency motions for immediate paternity testing and temporary custody arrangements pending final court decisions. "He's claiming concern about the child's welfare given your unstable financial situation and professional commitments," Elena explained, her expression reflecting both professional outrage and personal concern. "It's a transparent attempt to establish control from the beginning." Allegra looked down at Elliot, sleeping peacefully against her chest, unaware of the conflict surrounding his existence. "He's never even seen his son," she said quietly. "Never asked about the birth or his health. Never expressed any personal interest beyond legal claims." "That's going to be central to our response," Elena assured her. "His actions demonstrate that this isn't about genuine concern for the child, but about control over you and the situation." The legal battle that had begun during pregnancy now escalated into a full custody dispute, with Cassian's considerable resources deployed against a new mother still recovering from childbirth. The contrast could not have been starker. A billionaire with unlimited legal and financial resources versus a musician holding her newborn while responding to court filings. Yet this very contrast began shifting public perception. Media coverage, initially focused on the sensational aspects of a billionaire's paternity dispute, increasingly highlighted the human dimensions of the conflict. Photos of Allegra carefully shielding Elliot from cameras while entering the courthouse created a powerful visual narrative that contradicted Cassian's legal claims about her fitness as a mother. As the case progressed through preliminary hearings, Cassian maintained his distance, appearing in court impeccably dressed and surrounded by his legal team but never approaching Allegra or asking to see his son. His testimony focused on financial stability, educational opportunities, and long-term security, framing his claim for significant custody in terms of resources rather than relationship. The battle lines were clearly drawn, a legal war between wealth and connection, between power and nurturing, between abstract advantage and tangible love. And at the center of this conflict, growing and developing day by day, was a child who would ultimately transform both his parents' lives in ways neither could have anticipated. Elena Valdez had practiced family law for 23 years, handling everything from amicable divorces to bitter custody disputes. But she had never encountered a case quite like Allegra's, where a billionaire's resources were deployed so aggressively against a new mother whose only offense had been informing him about their child and requesting a piano. "We need to shift the dynamic," Elena explained during a strategy session in Allegra's apartment, where 3-week-old Elliot slept peacefully in a bassinet beside them. "Right now, Cassian is controlling the narrative, casting you as an opportunist seeking financial gain. We need to reframe this as what it actually is. A father using legal intimidation to avoid appropriate responsibility." Allegra adjusted Elliot's blanket, her movements gentle despite her exhaustion from nighttime feedings and legal stress. "I never wanted a public battle. I just wanted him to acknowledge his child and help provide a piano." "I know," Elena said sympathetically, "but he's forced this into the legal arena, and now we need to respond effectively. Not just for your sake, but for Elliot's future." Over the next several days, they developed a comprehensive countersuit that addressed the real issues at stake. appropriate child support based on Cassian's actual income rather than minimum guidelines, compensation for pregnancy-related expenses and income loss, and long-term educational funding commensurate with what Cassian would provide if he were actively parenting. These aren't excessive demands, Elena emphasized as they reviewed the filing. They're standard provisions adjusted for his extraordinary resources. Any family court would consider them reasonable given the circumstances. The countersuit also included a detailed parenting plan that acknowledged Cassian's right to a relationship with Elliot while establishing appropriate boundaries and gradual implementation, beginning with supervised visits and progressing based on demonstrated commitment and parenting capacity. This approach serves two purposes, Elena explained. It shows the court we're not trying to exclude him from Elliot's life, while also establishing that parental rights come with corresponding responsibilities and demonstrated commitment. When the countersuit was filed, Allegra felt a complex mixture of emotions, relief at finally presenting her perspective in formal legal terms, anxiety about Cassian's likely reaction, and lingering sadness that their child's early life was being shaped by courtroom battles rather than cooperative parenting. Cassian's response was swift and predictable. His legal team filed motions to dismiss the countersuit, characterizing it as extortionate and grossly disproportionate to standard child support guidelines. They demanded immediate paternity testing before any financial discussions and sought to portray Allegra's requests as evidence of her financial motivation in continuing the pregnancy. What they hadn't anticipated was the shift in public perception that accompanied these aggressive tactics. Media coverage, initially influenced heavily by Cassian's PR operation, began presenting more balanced perspectives as details of Allegra's countersuit became public. The simple fact that she had originally requested only a piano, a detail confirmed in her initial letter, which was now part of the court record, contrasted sharply with Cassian's characterization of her as seeking financial windfall. Financial publications, which had initially framed the story around potential threats to Cassian's fortune, began questioning the proportionality of his legal response. Entertainment media, drawn to the human drama, highlighted Allegra's continued teaching and performing despite the stress of new motherhood and legal battles. Even some tabloids, usually focused on sensationalism, noted the striking absence of any evidence that Cassian had attempted to see his child. This shifting narrative created the first significant pressure on Cassian's position. Accustomed to controlling public perception through sophisticated PR strategies, he now faced a story that resisted his preferred framing. The image of a new mother caring for an infant while defending herself against a billionaire's legal team created a visual and emotional narrative that no corporate communication strategy could effectively counter. As the case progressed through mandatory mediation attempts and preliminary hearings, Allegra focused on gathering evidence to support their legal position. With Elena's guidance, she documented everything: Elliot's developmental milestones, her adaptation of professional commitments to accommodate motherhood, the support system she had established for childcare during necessary work obligations. Most importantly, she maintained detailed records of Cassian's involvement, or lack thereof, in Elliot's life. The calendar entries were stark in their emptiness. No visits requested, no inquiries about well-being, no participation in medical appointments or childcare decisions. His engagement remained entirely through legal proxies, with no direct interaction with either Allegra or their son. This evidence of absent parenting became increasingly significant as the court proceedings advanced. Judge Martinez, who had been assigned to the case, showed particular interest in the contrast between legal claims and actual behavior. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in second chances. That's how love multiplies. Subscribe to Mr. Ellington Love Lines for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind you broken things can still bloom. Leave a comment with one lesson you're taking from this story. Your reflection might inspire our next episode.